Have you ever noticed how someone from Gen X can be standing in the middle of absolute chaos and barely react? The flight is delayed, the company is downsizing, the economy is uncertain for the 15th time this decade, the Wi-Fi is down. Everyone else is spiraling, and the Gen Xer in the room just shrugs and says, "It is what it is." No dramatic Instagram story, no long rant, no public meltdown. Just quiet endurance. And from the outside, it can look confusing. Do they not care? Are they emotionally detached? Or are they just really, really good at pretending everything's fine? Let me show you what's really happening under the surface, because this isn't apathy, it's psychology, it's resilience, and it was built long before self-care became a hashtag. Picture a typical Gen X childhood for a moment. The latchkey kid, the house key hanging around their neck, both parents working, be home before the streetlights turn on. If something broke, you figured it out. If you were bored, you entertained yourself. If you were upset, you dealt with it. Not because you didn't have feelings, but because the cultural environment didn't center those feelings. In psychology, we talk about adaptation. The human brain is constantly scanning its environment and asking one simple question: what do I need to survive here? For Gen X, growing up in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s meant navigating economic recessions, rising divorce rates, rapid technological change, and a cultural shift from analog to digital. Stability wasn't guaranteed. Independence wasn't optional. So their brains adapted. Research on stress inoculation suggests that moderate exposure to stress, especially early in life, can actually strengthen coping mechanisms later on. Think of it like a psychological vaccine, not overwhelming trauma, but enough friction to build grit. Gen X experienced a steady dose of figure it out. When you grow up learning that no one is coming to rescue you, complaining starts to feel inefficient. It's not that Gen X never feels frustration, of course they do, but their internal narrative often sounds like this: what's the point of talking about it if it won't change anything? That belief becomes a filter, a quiet sorting system in the brain. If something can be solved, solve it. If it can't, endure it. That's resilience in action. Resilience isn't loud. It doesn't post motivational quotes. It doesn't announce itself. It's the ability to absorb impact without shattering, like a shock absorber in a car. You don't see it working, but without it, every bump would wreck the vehicle. There's also something else at play: emotional self-containment. Gen X came to age before social media turned emotions into public content, before every inconvenience could be tweeted. Their emotional processing developed in private spaces, journals, late-night phone calls, long drives with music blasting. So their regulation system learned to internalize first, express second. Compare that to generations raised with constant digital validation. When you grow up sharing feelings online and receiving instant feedback, expression becomes part of regulation. For Gen X, regulation often happened silently. Does that mean one way is better? Not necessarily, but it does mean the wiring is different. There's a concept in psychology called locus of control. It describes whether you believe you have power over your life, internal locus, or whether outside forces determine everything, external locus. Studies have found that people who develop a strong internal locus of control tend to cope better with stress. Gen X, shaped by independence, often developed a powerful internal narrative: it's on me. That belief can be heavy. It can also be empowering. If something goes wrong, the Gen X brain doesn't default to outrage, it defaults to assessment. Okay, what can I do? And if the answer is nothing, the brain switches to acceptance mode. Complaining feels like wasted energy because it doesn't move the situation forward. But here's where it gets interesting. Sometimes not complaining isn't just resilience. Sometimes it's armor. When you grow up in an environment where vulnerability isn't consistently met with comfort, your nervous system learns to minimize visible distress. You might feel it deeply, but you don't externalize it. You swallow it. You compartmentalize it. You keep moving. That's a survival strategy. And survival strategies don't disappear just because life gets easier. So when someone says, "Why doesn't Gen X ever talk about their problems?" the answer might be because they learned that talking wasn't always useful. There's also a cultural identity piece. Gen X is often described as skeptical, pragmatic, and slightly cynical. They watched institutions fail. They saw corporate loyalty dissolve. They witnessed promises break. When you grow up watching that, you learn not to expect too much. And when you don't expect too much, you're less shocked when things go wrong. Lower expectations can create higher resilience. Think about it like walking on uneven ground. If you expect the path to be bumpy, you adjust your stride. You don't stumble every time. But if you expect smooth pavement and suddenly hit gravel, you trip. Gen X expects gravel. Now, here's the part people misunderstand. Not complaining doesn't mean not caring. In fact, sometimes it means caring so much that you choose stability over noise. Imagine a family crisis. The Gen Xer often becomes the emotional anchor. While others panic, they handle logistics, make calls, organize, move. It's not that they're untouched by fear. It's that their brain prioritizes action over expression. This aligns with research on problem-focused coping. Some people manage stress by processing emotions. Others manage stress by tackling the problem head-on. Gen X, broadly speaking, leans heavily into problem-focused coping. It's efficient, it's powerful, it's also exhausting. Because when you don't complain, people assume you're fine. And sometimes you're not fine, you're just capable. There's a subtle loneliness in being the strong one. When everyone sees you as the resilient one, they stop asking how you're really doing. You become the shock absorber for everyone else's bumps. So if you're Gen X watching this, maybe you recognize yourself. The quiet endurance, the dry humor, the internal eye roll instead of the public rant. The ability to survive layoffs, recessions, heartbreak, and still show up to work on Monday like nothing happened. That's not emotional numbness, that's adaptation. But here's the deeper psychological layer. Resilience isn't just about tolerating stress, it's about meaning-making. Gen X grew up in an era of transition, analog to digital, stability to uncertainty. They had to reinvent themselves more than once. And when you repeatedly rebuild, you start to trust your ability to rebuild again. That trust reduces panic. If you've survived before, your brain has evidence. We've handled worse. And that memory of survival becomes a buffer against future stress. Neuroscience shows that past successful coping experiences strengthen neural pathways associated with confidence and emotional regulation. In simple terms, your brain remembers that you didn't break, so you don't panic at every crack. But let's gently challenge something too. Not complaining is powerful, it's admirable, it's resilient, but it can also suppress needed connection. Humans are wired for co-regulation. Sometimes speaking the struggle isn't weakness, it's bonding. And here's the beautiful shift happening now. Many Gen Xers are starting to blend resilience with openness. They're realizing they can be strong and expressive, capable and vulnerable, independent and supported. That's growth. Resilience doesn't mean silence forever. It means you have the capacity to endure and the choice to share. So why doesn't Gen X complain? Because they were trained by circumstance to adapt. Because they learned that action often works better than outrage. Because their nervous systems are calibrated for turbulence. Because they've seen cycles repeat and know storms pass. Because they trust themselves to handle it. And maybe, just maybe, because deep down they understand something profoundly human. Life isn't fair, but it is survivable. If you're Gen X, your quiet strength matters. It shaped families, workplaces, culture. You became the bridge between worlds, analog childhood, digital adulthood. You carried transitions on your back. And if you're not Gen X, maybe this gives you a new lens. The silence isn't indifference. It's history. It's wiring. It's resilience built the long way. So the next time you see someone shrug in the middle of chaos, don't assume they don't feel it. They might just know something you don't yet. This, too, will pass. And maybe the real psychological power isn't in who complains the loudest. It's in who keeps going. If this made you see yourself or someone in your life a little differently, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Are you Gen X? Do you recognize this quiet resilience in yourself? Or maybe you're from another generation trying to understand it better. Let's talk about it. And if you enjoy diving into the psychology behind everyday behaviors like this, stick around. There's a lot more happening inside the human mind than we ever realize.